Since the creation of Israel in 1948, the nation lacked any official recognition from its Arab neighbors, particularly Egypt. Over the years, 4 wars occurred due to land disputes over the Sinai Peninsula, thus severely marring the relationship between these two countries. Israel violently seized Egyptian land in the Six Days' War of 1967, while Egypt recaptured this territory in 1973. The Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and the Egyptian President Anwar Sadat refused to make peace with each other. Many leaders, such as then U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, failed at mediating negotiations. However, when President Jimmy Carter took office in 1977, he blatantly ignored the recommendation from his advisors to stay out of this Middle East conflict by arranging a meeting of these two countries at his presidential retreat, Camp David. During these meetings at Camp David, President Carter effectively mediated the negotiations between Egypt and Israel through persistent and persuasive discussions, thus representing the United States as the reigning superpower. And Egypt escalated. The world watched on edge as the conflicts in the Middle East could wind up being a vehicle for a dispute between the United States and the Soviet Union.
The Middle East for years has been and was the place where you thought if we're going to end up blowing up the world, that's where it will start. If there's going to be a nuclear confrontation between a superpower that's going to come out of the Middle East, so finding a way to tamp that down was to him extremely important.
Before beginning official negotiations, Carter asked Sadat and Begin to formally write separate proposals as to their desires to obtain a treaty, assuming they eventually agree upon one. Although both nations clearly wanted peace, Sadat wished for Israel to return the Sinai Peninsula without any Israeli people living on its soil, while Israel desired to continue the colonization of the peninsula for the sake of Israeli security. Each country instantly shot down the opposing proposal, taking Carter by surprise. He had anticipated the two leaders to have a better understanding of the other's situation, but the first 3 days at Camp David failed miserably, so Carter had to rethink his tactics. President Carter strategically set up a series of meetings without both Begin and Sadat being present simultaneously. A number of small engagements between representatives of Begin and Sadat took place. These meetings began as between a representative from Israel or Egypt and a United States representative, and lasted until the hostility had subsided. At this point, Carter decided that lower-ranking members of either Israel or Egypt could meet with the leader of the opposing nation, culminating in a meeting of Sadat and Begin on the 13th day. As the negotiations progressed, the media played a very small role because Carter had deliberately prevented them from being present at Camp David. Due to the minimal media involvement, Carter's remarks on the results of the success of Camp David took the world by surprise.
Still, great difficulties that remain, and many hard issues to be settled. The questions that have brought warfare and bitterness to the Middle East for the last 30 years will not be settled overnight. But we should all recognize the substantial achievements that have been made. One of the agreements that President Sadat and Prime Minister Begin are signing tonight is entitled A Framework for Peace in the Middle East.
This speech restored the American people's faith in their president, as shown through his soaring approval ratings, which went from 38 to over 50. He finally made progress in foreign policy, a feat he had yet to accomplish during his presidency. Jimmy Carter's persistence throughout the Camp David negotiations created a significant peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, defining the U.S.'s relationship with the Middle East for the future. Sadat and Begin both received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1978 for their work in formulating a treaty between their nations. However, they both credited Jimmy Carter as being the main force that allowed them to effectively negotiate. On March 26, 1979, Sadat and Begin officially signed the treaty on the lawn of the White House, thus illustrating the pivotal role that President Carter played. Despite his lack of a more favorable legacy due to other events during his presidency, Jimmy Carter clearly demonstrated effective leadership through his mediation of Israeli-Egyptian relations that resulted in the Camp David Accords.